Good morning. Good to be with you again. And for the next couple of weeks, we are going to be looking at the great masters of the Kagyu lineage in the sense of introducing you to your particular family, in essence, the Vajradakini family, which is a specific Tibetan family. And, I realized that when we started maybe in 2020, I was focusing on general compassion and general Mahayana teachings, like the mind training systems, because we were in such a state of crisis. And now, after spending many years on the common ground of the Mahayana, in order to go deeper in our understanding together, it'll be more specifically within the Tibetan tradition. And in the Tibetan tradition, there's always an emphasis on lineage because everything is passed person to person. And I just want to show you a picture of Milarepa. Today we're going to be probably this week and next week and maybe a third week, we're going to be, I'm going to be talking about Milarepa because he's so significant in the Tibetan lineage, and he's so relatable and so well loved because he's so relatable. So do the share. Okay, so this is on the left Marpa, who we talked about last week, and on the right Milarepa. Remember, we were thinking of Marpa as having a sort of curmudgeon type personality, and he had many, many significant students, but his most significant student was Milarepa. And Milarepa is a key figure for many reasons, but as I was saying, each of these extraordinary people gathered all the threads of existing Buddhism of their time, then accomplished and then passed those teachings. So not only did they pass them, but they passed them on to the next enlightened person who carried this lineage that's now from Marpa was 1,000 years old. The Drikung lineage is 800 years old. Okay, I'm trying to get out. And okay, there we go, stop share. All right, so Milarepa is often depicted laughing, the sense of his joy. He has his ear cupped, listening to the cries of suffering, and his body is often depicted as green because the second half of his life in retreat, he really let go of all worldly desires and lived mostly on nettles, and so his body turned green because of the nettles. So when I say that Milarepa was popular and relatable, it has to do with his story, and the way we think of his story is also very much a teaching on how to attain enlightenment in one lifetime and the particular path and the particular quality of perseverance and discipline that this aspiration takes. So it's important to think of his early life, and his early life is very much like us. in the sense that he created a lot of karma, and not like us in the sense that he actually was a mass murderer. So he was born into a family, and they had a lovely little house and farm, but his father died, and the inheritance went to the uncle, not to Milarepa's mother and Milarepa and his sister. And so his mother was distraught. The relatives were not in any way helpful to the family, and the mother said to Milarepa, "You're the man of the family now. This is on you. I want revenge." You know, we can all relate, you know, family stories, greed, inheritance, all the stuff that happens in small villages and towns all over the world. So Milarepa is not really sure about this, but he was someone who had learned to read and had studied with the village scholar. So he left school, having no money anymore, and went to this teacher who taught black magic. And he accomplished it fairly quickly, and went back to the village, and there was a wedding. And he was hiding outside watching the wedding, and in order to accomplish what his mother wanted, he caused the roof to fall in and killed 35 people. So, you know, it was devastating to him, devastating to the village, and he was immediately filled with this incredible regret and guilt. So he went back to the teacher and said, I can't live with what I've done, please help me. And the teacher sent him to other teachers who eventually said, well, really the person who might be able to help you is Marpa. So he traveled to the area of Tibet where Marpa was. And as you remember, Marpa went back and forth to India twice, 3 times total, but at this point it was before his 3rd trip. So he was farming, his livelihood was a farmer. So inwardly he was enlightened, but outwardly he looked like an ordinary farmer. But Milarepa was looking for, you know, this great spiritual teacher, and, you know, walking down all these country roads, and didn't even recognize Marpa because he looked so ordinary. And then, you know, was he, you know, I'm looking for Marpa, the spiritual teacher, and you know, Marpa probably had a little fun with him, but then it became clear that he revealed himself, that he was the Marpa that Milarepa was searching for. And then there's this interesting dynamic. If you remember, last week I was talking about the offering one makes for the Dharma. It's actually one of the reasons that in Vajradakini, we really keep that tradition of making offerings and not creating a materialistic relationship with the Dharma. It's the student coming to the teacher, recognizing the preciousness, recognizing their own suffering, and that this is the medicine they need. But Milarepa had nothing. So in essence, what I'm saying is that the teacher doesn't need anything, but the student needs to offer nonetheless. So Milarepa says, I have nothing. So all I can do is offer you my body, speech, and mind. And clearly there was a karmic relationship that they both recognized. And then I'm going to give a little caveat, because this was in a particular culture, in a particular time. And as one of the teachers in India said, you know, when we were receiving teachings on these stories, don't confuse this with the teacher-student relationship now. We don't have students like this, and we don't have teachers like this. So Marpa could see that Milarepa was coming with this very heavy karma of having killed so many people. And he could see that Milarepa needed a whole purification process. So this next part of his biography is about relying on a spiritual teacher. It's still very important, and still very important in the Tibetan tradition, but this was a special situation. So Marpa could see, all right, this person really needs to have their whole mind purified, has to have the whole karma purified. So he really treated him harshly, very, very harshly. And he refused to give him any teachings at all, but said, okay, you can live here and you can work on my farm. And what I want you to do is build a tower for my son. You know, essentially a home, but it was a 9-story tower. You know, in those days, you would hire people to, you know, still in India, to carry the bricks and to mix the mortar, and none of that. You have to do it all yourself. So Milarepa would carry all the stones on his back, and he built this 9-story tower. And Marpa came over to inspect and said, oh, you idiot, why did you build it here? I told you to build it over there. This is not acceptable. I want you to take all the stones apart. I want you to put them back in the fields where they were and start over completely over here. Milarepa, of course, you know, had followed the directions, but he didn't, he wasn't disrespectful to Marpa. So he started over. And it was backbreaking work, and it said that his back was raw, and he rebuilt the tower. And Marpa came out to look and said, what is the matter with you? I told you to build it over there. You know, I can't work with somebody who's so stupid. What is your problem? So then, of course, Milarepa experienced great discouragement, but put all the stones back, built another tower, and that tower is still standing in Tibet. But he was, you know, after this, he was extremely discouraged. He thought, I'm never going to get teachings from this teacher. I might as well give up. And Marpa had this wonderful wife, Dagmema, and she couldn't believe the way Marpa was treating Milarepa, and she was on Milarepa's side. And so she said, listen, I'm going to pack you some food. I know you don't have any money. Take this, you know, this special object and this special object, and absolutely go ahead, run away. And so Milarepa ran away to one of a very accomplished students of Marpa's. And that student wasn't sure about what to do with this runaway student, but he accepted him. You know, he taught him 1 or 2 small things, but then there was this big gathering, and Marpa was calling all of the students back together. And again, another demonstration, this very accomplished student said, well, in order to go to this next training, I have to offer everything I have. And so he offered, you know, he just cleared out his whole house, and they went together to see Marpa. And Marpa looks at the accomplished student and says, you know, you say you're offering me everything, but you left something back. I know you left something back. And the student realized that there was one sick animal he hadn't brought with him. So he went back and he got the sick animal. And Marpa relented with Milarepa, and Milarepa apologized, said he was so sorry. Marpa let him come back, and eventually started to allow Milarepa to sit in the teaching. So what I want you to take from this part of the story is, a sense of the view or the practice. There is an aspect of the practice that is the purification of our karma, clearing our karma so that we can really hear the teachings and accomplish the teachings. And with someone like a mass murderer, it was very, very drastic. So now we do things like prostrations. We don't have people, teachers don't ask people to do such extreme things. But you can hear it as, okay, there's a purification aspect. And then Milarepa was then welcome and received all of the teachings, and Marpa, as I said, was enlightened and gave him years of teachings. But so there's a study period, and then there's the accomplishment period. How do you accomplish the teachings? And Milarepa, having cleared his karma, having received many teachings, then started doing retreats. And the first retreat he did was a year contemplating impermanence. And what I'm saying in terms of how profound and subtle these concepts are, we're flipping through our books, that we order on Amazon, and there's a paragraph on impermanence, and we think, oh, I've faced aging, I know what this is, or etc. But it's rare to go into the kind of depth that totally transforms your mind. So Marpa built Milarepa, or had him build a little retreat hut. And these retreat huts are very, very small. And there's often, even today, a traditional retreat hut like the ones we have in India has one little turntable kind of window where someone could put vegetables on one side, and then it turns and the person inside takes them. And then the door has a brick lying up against the door. So it's clear that the person is not leaving. And when the teacher comes to see, they see that the brick has not moved. The person hasn't left retreat. So there's this quality of commitment to the retreat. So he's in this tiny hut, and they say that he had a candle on top of his head, which means he didn't sleep. He may have dozed off, but he didn't slump over and go into a deep sleep. So the sense was his commitment to the practice of contemplating impermanence was complete, absolutely complete. So after about a year, he had a pretty incredible dream about his family and his homeland. So he would have telepathically connected with Marpa and said, please release me from this retreat. I feel like I have to go back, and if my mother is still alive, or if anybody in my family is still alive, I just need one more connection to them. And Marpa says, oh yes, go check on everything in your homeland, but don't lose your commitment. So Milarepa goes back to his little village. And remember, he's been contemplating impermanence for a year. So he goes back and he sees the family home is just a wreck. Everything is caved in, half the walls are caved in. The bones of his mother are lying there. She's, died and totally decomposed. The books he was studying, there's some little tattered remnants, but everything is gone. And so his next stage opens up of complete renunciation. So he sees even those things that he was attached to, not only the village life, but his family, he really understands their impermanence. And he really understands that for him, the path to enlightenment is beyond any attachment to his former life, more important, more significant, and the growing clarity of his mind is worthy of his life. Let's say it like that. So he decides he'd at least check in with his aunt because he's so impoverished, maybe his aunt will help him stay in retreat. And his aunt sees him and takes the broom and starts beating him and says, "You ruined our lives. Ever since you killed all those people, our whole family has been outcast. Your sister couldn't marry because we've become the horrible people of the village. She's become a prostitute. You've ruined the family name. Sign over the papers of the inheritance, and I'll at least give you a bag of flour." So she gives him a bag of flour and a, moth-eaten blanket, and he goes, "Oh, Aunt, you're going to regret this one day." But it was him letting go of all attachment and worldly concerns. It was the impermanence and in the direct encounter with his mind and in the proof in the direct experience of his life. So from there, he began the next stage of his life, which I'll talk a little bit more about next week. But he had accomplished creating karma, purifying the karma, and purifying the karma, he was able to take in the teachings and begin a path of realization that he would achieve in retreat. And his particular style of teaching was he would wander from place to place, and he would express to the local people in song what his understanding was. Not necessarily, sometimes it was about his understanding, but essentially what the villagers, if they had a question or what he could see, was the thing on their mind as people encountered him. And because of that, we have the compendium of the 100,000 songs of Milarepa. So the songs were so useful to people and helpful for people that they were memorized and passed over all of these years. And so to get us started today, I'm going to recite one of his songs. This one is called Aging, Illness, and Samsara. And again, as you hear this, think about, we studied the Heart Sutra. Milarepa accomplished what the Heart Sutra is pointing out to, and then across 1,000 years is singing a poem to us about what fully understanding that means, a commentary in a song form. And here it is. As long as you don't realize there is no aging in reality, the suffering of aging is inconceivably hard. If when you're old, you don't remember there's a dharma so uplifting, that's karmic actions from before just catching up with you. As long as you don't realize there is no illness in reality, the suffering of illness is inconceivably hard. And since you never know when some illness just might come and strike you down, the thing to do is practice the Dharma. That is what will heal the pain. The nature of samsara is not based anywhere. You look at it, but what you find is you cannot find it. If realized, surprise to surprise, it turns out it's nirvana. The nature of everything is emptiness. Yogis and yoginis never try to cling to this. So aging and illness, that's karmic actions from before just catching up with you. Practice the Dharma, that's what will heal the pain. And this nature of everything is the emptiness. And I couldn't resist, I was trying to find a short song for today. And one of the best translators of the Milarepa songs is a teacher who I knew in my lifetime, who's no longer alive now. But he actually was an incarnation of Milarepa. And it was really interesting to study with him because he would teach for an hour and then spontaneously he would create a song that summarized what he had just taught, and then he would have us all sing the song. But what came up in a very simple, spontaneous search of his songs was this one called Depression and Fears Are My Friends. So this is Khenpo Tsultrim Gyatso, who teaches in the tradition of Milarepa. Depression does not come or go. Depression does not arise or cease. Depression does not bind me, and so there is no being free. Depression is not real, so depression is my Dharma friend. Fear does not come or go. Fear does not arise or cease. Fear does not bind me, so there's no being free. And so fear is meditation's best friend. So you can see these wonderful teachers responding to who is in front of them and singing a short, clear poem from their own experience of the Dharma. So let's just take this in for a moment, thinking of, okay, that was a different culture. Although, and it was an extreme situation, but still what Milarepa's teaching through his life are the same stages that we go through in our own way of accumulating karma. So let's say all the different kinds of suffering that we entertain in our mind, and then working with a spiritual teacher, working with the Dharma in the form that we encounter today, and finding a way in this time and place to rely on the Dharma and making a commitment to the Dharma and to our own practice. And then really looking at, from the lineage, in my own way, I'm persevering, but what does perseverance really mean in terms of enlightenment, if this is truly my goal? So let's take a few minutes to just think about that. So as we're thinking about this, the time is very different now. The relationship between Marpa and Milarepa, even though it started with such intense purification, was the doorway for an extraordinary enlightenment of a mass murderer. So that's one thing. We see that Marpa had lots of students. This was the only student he treated in this way, and it was for a specific purification process that was necessary. All the other students, we don't have their stories, but it was very different relationship, and also in this era, we don't live with our teachers. There isn't that quality of intimacy and direct daily life kind of instruction. So think about what you might take from this part of the story that would be helpful to you. Not, oh, this is a very scary story, I'd never want to be in that situation. More what part of it seems, oh, I can understand a little more from this story. And then what's interesting, or what you probably will find more interesting, is when Milarepa became a teacher and helped so many people, and the profundity of his realization, not only helping the people of his time, but still being quite relevant for us in this time. So let's do the brief dedication and we'll have a little discussion period. Bodhicitta, excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher.